I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today, we are discussing developments that will have large impacts on e-commerce platforms that allow users to provide product reviews. User reviews are an important means to drive sales. In a global marketplace, purchasers have a lot of options, maybe more so than they've ever had in the past. Purchasers no longer need to restrict purchasing decisions to whatever the local store maintains in inventory. So, with so many options, how do purchasers make choices? If you're like me, I maybe search on Google, what is the best? What is the best work chair, best dress shoes, best board game? I know. It's not a great way of making informed decisions, but it does spotlight where regulators and law enforcement are increasingly focused. Where are consumers turning to get information on the quality and the utility of the products and services they purchased, and how consumers learn or be known to trust that data? Well, they often go to user reviews, the reviews submitted online, presumably by other members of the community who are using those same products and services and are providing helpful information about whether this product or this service is right. User reviews, however, are far from perfect and may themselves be the subject of manipulation. Everything from paying for good reviews, deleting bad reviews, or creating fake AI-enabled reviews. At that juncture is where the FTC is entering the picture. With new rules relating to user reviews, the FTC is changing the ballgame for user reviews and creating a new regulatory framework that will apply to every organization leveraging user reviews in their operations. To discuss this development, I have invited two of my colleagues, Lance Murashige and Harsimar Dhanoa, to the podcast. Both Lance and Harsimar represent e-commerce companies, both big and small, including in front of the FTC. Lance, Harsimar, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
So, Lance, maybe start the conversation. The FTC has been focusing in on issues relating to endorsements in a variety of different contexts. What is driving the concern here? And where are we seeing in the market where the FTC feels like they need to take action?
Thanks, Scott. I think in what is really an increasingly competitive global market, our clients are telling us that in order to stay competitive, they need more than just superior products. They need to have engagement with their customers that show that the customers are deriving value. And that really comes through reviews. We're hearing that our clients know that their customers frequently look to reviews when they're making purchasing decisions. The FTC knows that too. And so in recent years, what we have seen is a lot of FTC focus on endorsements and reviews through particularly the civil investigative demand process. So when they're asking whether it's a business-to-business company or a business-to-consumer company, how are they going about interacting with their customers and how are they engaging with those customers' reviews?
So is the issue at bottom a lack of disclosure? In other words, an individual is promoting a product on her or his social media feed about how much they love this particular product, and there is no corresponding disclosure that, in fact, the manufacturer of that product had paid the social media owner for that promotion. Is that really at the heart of this?
Yeah, so I think this really gets to what has been decades of guidance from the FTC through endorsement guidelines, where they have given guidance to companies on a whole range of conduct when it comes to endorsements. So on the one end of the spectrum, certainly, there is an issue where there needs to be proper disclosure about when a company has given somebody something of value. But on the other end of the spectrum, there has always been a prohibition, at least from the FTC's view, against certain kinds of incentives. So, for example, the FTC has always been very clear you cannot give somebody something, to say a lie about your products. If a customer thinks your product is bad, you cannot pay them to say that your product is good. So, no amount of disclosure can fix that kind of rule. But on the other end of the spectrum that I started with, there's always been some amount of disclosure that the FTC has required when it comes to making sure that customers know about relationships between companies and the people that are endorsing them.
So I assume that's why when I'm watching an infomercial late at night, Lance, and they're talking about how great this set of steak knives are, and at the bottom it says these are professional actors as opposed to the actual users of the knives, and that's why I'm getting that disclosure.
So yeah, so sometimes it is making sure that people know who's a professional actor. As you're scrolling through Instagram or you're scrolling through TikTok, when it says hashtag ad or paid promotion in text in the hashtags or as an overlay, that's all to make sure that, even when a endorser is saying something that they believe in, making sure that it's clear to the viewer that they know what that relationship is.
Yeah, interesting. So, Harsimar, I'm interested in your perspective on this because this is a set of practices that has not only drawn the scrutiny and ire of the FTC, but has also been on the minds of state regulators and state legislatures as they have been adopting new legal frameworks in their states.
Yeah. So, Scott, what's interesting is that we've seen a lot of lawmakers focus on, a different type of marketing for the most part. It's targeted advertising. But what this has done is really put pressure on businesses to say, we want our customers to be aware of what our products are, what they can do. And now we can't reach them through, this advertising mechanism because more people are opting out, or more people, are trying to find ways to connect in different channels. Marketers are now trying to say, okay, where can we go to the places that people trust most, which are these reviews? And so it's really putting a lot of pressure to find ways to either leverage those reviews, leverage influencers, particularly given the growth of social media, to make sure that they're still getting the reach that they had before.
Yeah, interesting. So those state laws, are they prohibiting the endorsements? Are they requiring disclosure? And how has that kind of been developed from a state policy perspective?
So typically the endorsement guidelines that we've seen have been at the federal level. The FTC has sort of really led the charge here. But what's also happened is, I believe it's every state, including the District of Columbia, has what might be called a little FTC act or a law against unfair and deceptive acts and practices. And oftentimes these laws are modeled on the federal standard, which is what those endorsement guidelines are based on. So what oftentimes will happen is the FTC will say, listen, under the federal framework, this may violate the law around endorsements or around reviews. And that gives state lawmakers, state regulators the opportunity to say, you know what, we have a similar law and we're going to take a similar position.
Got it. So then maybe, Lance, I'm interested to understand a little bit about how these rules are being proposed. So the FTC Act has Section 5, and Section 5 prohibits unfair, deceptive trade practices. And they have enforced that prohibition in many different contexts over the course of decades. And they also have published a fair amount of guidance. And as Harsimar was just describing, the guidelines surrounding how to do this. Is this an extension on their enforcement activity, or are they engaging in a different type of policymaking?
Thanks, Scott. So it's a different kind of policymaking right now. So the endorsement guidelines that we were talking about before, those have been around for decades. They get revised every now and then. The last revision was 2023 to update them to reflect the modern online environment that we talked about. But those guidelines are just guidelines. They're a window into how the FTC has been interpreting its authority under Section 5 to enforce unfair or deceptive acts and practices. The rules that we're going to talk about today, those are under the FTC's rulemaking authority. So those have gone through notice and comment, and now they're final. And once they're published in the register, they'll be effective. What's the big difference between the guidelines and the rules? Under the guidelines, there wasn't penalty authority. But under the rules, if you have a rule violation, the FTC can seek financial penalties for that rule violation at $50,000, roughly, a violation. So I think, that's why we think that now is a really particularly good time for companies to be evaluating their risk when it comes to reviews of their products and services.
So that is a point maybe worth pausing on, Lance, because I think what you're saying is that if the FTC were to go its more common route of engaging in enforcement activity under the FTC Act, that there is not the statutory ability of seeking fines and penalties for those violations. Oftentimes, those fines and penalties may come either as part of an order in a negotiation, or they could be in the nature of additional violations of the resulting consent decree. But the distinction that you're making here is that if they use their rulemaking authority, that dynamic goes away, and that there is the ability of issuing fines and penalties immediately as opposed to going through the first step of that consent decree.
That's right. So in recent years, the FTC has really been exploring different ways to get financial relief, whether it was a notice of penalty offense, or other mechanisms where they tried to bring conduct potentially violating Section 5 within one of their other provisions that allows them to recover money. But this rulemaking really allows the FTC to short circuit that, to go straight to, we have this promulgated rule, it's very clear, we think that this company has violated that rule, and then you can go straight to the penalty, don't pass go.
Interesting. Okay, so fines and penalties clearly, just something new. Maybe we just dive right into what these rules actually say and what do they prohibit and how are those different? Maybe Harsimar, maybe ask you first as we're thinking about those testimonials, celebrity testimonials or different reviews. What is the thing that we need to know about how those can operate going forward?
Yeah, Scott. And just to level set, I think it'd be helpful just to make sure we're all thinking about what counts as a review or a testimonial. And so reviews at a high level are someone's evaluation of a product or a service. And the important thing to think about is that it's not just a written review, like, oh, I love this product, it helped make my life great, but also, a rating. So if you put something as 5 stars and there's no accompanying text, that's still a review itself. Testimonials are related. They're sort of advertising or promotional messages, basically having a person say, this is my opinion, my belief, and my experience with this product. And when people view it, they sort of add on the person's bona fides to it to say, okay, this is why I believe you. Oftentimes, it may be just an average person, it may be an influencer, or sometimes you'll even see celebrity testimonials. And it's important to think of these two because oftentimes the rules for reviews and testimonials are pretty similar. There's also a new category the FTC has been focusing on. They call them indicators of social media influence. So these are metrics that the average person might use to figure out, okay, is this someone who's popular in the online market? So things like likes, follows, retweets, plays, and these ones have slightly different rules as well.
I'm just thinking as you're describing this, that it seems as though there are going to be a lot of gray areas. So initially I'm thinking, okay, were we only talking about products here? Or are we talking about services too? Like, so if somebody comes out and writes on LinkedIn that they think Scott is a great lawyer or a bad lawyer, is that like, and they happen to be a friend of mine, I took them to dinner the night before, like, is now that a potential kind of violation or endorsement? How broadly is this applicable? Like, obviously when somebody goes out and promotes a presidential candidate, right? There's also potential that there's relationships there that would be in scope. What type of promotions or endorsements are within scope?
Yeah, Scott. So the rule is written pretty broadly. It applies to businesses and it defines businesses as entities that are selling products or services. It's not limited just to companies that are selling to consumers. So while the FTC historically has primarily targeted business to consumer businesses that are selling directly to consumers, this rule also applies to B2B. So our B2B clients out there should be considering these rules. For example, like review platforms like G2. Those are potentially in scope just like any other review platform.
I'll add, with the penalties that are here for first-time offenses, reviews are sort of described in terms of a product, a service, or the business itself. So you're right that there are gray areas, and you want to be thinking about these very carefully because the risk of getting it wrong is now a lot more expensive than it was before.
So, Harsimar, what happens if there is a quote fake review? I mean, one, how do you identify what a fake review is? And what are the consequences of putting or using a fake review?
Yeah, so fake reviews have been a really big focus of this rule. And I want to be clear, it's not to say that, let's say somebody writes a fake review of your business, now you're going to get in trouble. What this is really focusing on is, are you taking steps that are leading to reviews that don't actually reflect people's experiences? So it might be something like, are you offering an incentive specifically for a positive review? One example, I've seen is write a review about how much you love our product and get a 10% off coupon for your next purchase. That's the type of thing that may raise red flags around, are you saying if we write a review that has a particular sentiment, a positive one, then you're going to get this discount. There are also pieces around AI generated fake reviews, and this is becoming a larger concern just given the proliferation of generative AI tools, essentially going around and mass producing reviews where there is no actual customer on the back end. And it's just something that the company has put together to make their product seem more popular. So that's a similar piece around fake reviews. And tangentially, there's similar rules around these indicators of social media influence, really focusing on if you go and take the steps of buying fake followers, bots that aren't real users at the end of the day, or getting bots to like your content, that's the type of thing that is going to be on the FTC's radar and that are captured by the fake review portion of the rule.
So does that mean that all kind of AI oriented, like non-human oriented reviews would constitute fake reviews? Like if you have different types of bots that are promoting your business on a third-party platform, not even on your own site, going into a review site and using technology to be able to promote my brands, those would constitute fake reviews.
Exactly, Scott. Essentially, what the FTC is concerned about is, if you go to a product page on some website and you see reviews, as a consumer, oftentimes you're thinking this is the experience of people who were in my shoes, who bought the product and had a good experience. And so if I buy it, hopefully I'll have a similar experience. But if you're going around and you're basically using bots to generate, positive reviews that don't actually reflect a specific consumer's experience, and you're saying, oh, this is John Doe and I use this product and it solved all of my problems, that's the type of fake review where there isn't a person actually describing their experience is going to sort of run afoul here.
I have a lot of questions with that, Harsimar, including how is it that we would detect what is fake and what is not, and how is it that we would justify that indeed something is real. But maybe before we get into that set of issues, Lance, I started by asking, hey, is this really a matter of disclosure? And the new rules also speak to what disclosure would be needed.
Yeah, that's right, Scott. So the new rules really have some very clear guidelines, what is definitely a rule violation. So to begin, there's a lot of discussion about insider reviews. So a review from an executive or an employee, or say an executive's relative, family member. Those kinds of reviews, even if they're totally 100% true, a genuine reflection of the person's experience with a product or service, they still have to disclose the relationship with the company. It has to show, hey, I'm an executive, I am a family member, and I love this product. What the rules also say is the companies need to provide clear instructions on those disclosure requirements when they're soliciting insider reviews. So let's say an employer wants their employees to go out there and engage, they have to be very clear about those disclosure requirements that we just discussed. If they're going to ask a family member, they have to be very clear with their family member about, hey, I would love it if you went and wrote a review about your experience with this, but you need to disclose that. If the company isn't making that effort to provide those clear instructions when they're asking people who are insiders to provide reviews, that can lead to real liability for a company. Another really important distinction or call out from this rule is that disclosures are going to have to be clear and conspicuous. That has been a real focus of the FTC in recent years, making sure that disclosures of all kinds are clear and conspicuous. But here they've given us a definition of clear and conspicuous. And I think what a lot of listeners are going to be interested in is that clear and conspicuous information. It can't be behind, for example, a hyperlink or hovering over an icon. It really needs to be right there, front and center. A consumer or somebody interacting with a disclosure, according to the FTC, shouldn't have to go to another page or another site in order to learn about the disclosure of the relationship between the reviewer and the product or service in the company.
So in other words, it's additional disclosure making some of these social media posts very long, in that you actually have to disclose it inside of the post itself.
That's right. It wouldn't be sufficient, according to the FTC, to just give a hyperlink that says disclaimer or important information right here. And then at the end of that chain, there's a disclosure about this kind of relationship. Now, of course, you said that there's going to be gray areas. How much detail is going to need to be in a disclosure? That is going to be fact dependent. It's going to depend on the medium. It's going to depend on what's obvious to the consumer. But right now we have at least some clear guidance from the FTC in the rule about what definitely would not be clear and conspicuous and what definitely is going to require disclosure.
All right. So if I have this straight, we have now specific prohibitions on specific types of, quote, fake ads or fake reviews, I should say. We have more specific, in some case, laborious disclosure that needs to be added to different types of reviews. And then Harsimar, as I understand it, the third leg to this stool on these new rules are actually thinking about it slightly differently. We're not trying to prohibit fake reviews, but we are also trying to prevent businesses from discouraging users from providing reviews or not displaying all of the negative reviews that they may have received in the past.
That's right, Scott. So it really is around the steps to try to suppress reviews that you may not want associated with your product. Things like trying to intimidate or otherwise influence customers by saying, if you write a bad review, that it's still truthful, we're going to go and pursue legal action, even if you know that there wouldn't be a basis for actually filing the claim. The other one, and this is one where we actually saw recent FTC enforcement action on, is if you let's say you have reviews and there are reviews below a certain threshold that you just don't display, or you don't let's say you put them at the back of the queue of reviews that you have in there, things like that can distort what a consumer's view of the product is. The case in particular was around a company that let users write reviews, but if the review was lower than 4 stars, it had to go be specifically approved to be posted, and they just never took the steps to actually approve those reviews. And so the only ones that showed up were these sort of 4 and 5 star reviews that made the product seem a lot better, at least in consumers' eyes, than some consumers felt.
I was just going to add that the rule also has some additional information or additional requirements when it comes to the kinds of sites where a company may have control over the reviews that appear. So Harsimar just gave that great example of a company exerting its control over certain thresholds. The rule also makes clear that it's unlawful to represent a company-controlled website as providing independent reviews if it's really actually controlled by the company. So let's take an example. Let's pretend I made widgets. I'm in a competitive market of widget makers. It would be unlawful for me to create, for example, a widget review website and not have any indication that widget review website is actually secretly controlled by me. And even though I'm giving reviews of all sorts of widgets, if I'm the one in control of that website, that would be unlawful to not represent the relationship.
So, I mean, yeah. All right. So it's kind of a combination of the disclosure and the fake review, or kind of the suppression, kind of all the above for that category. I mean, I don't know if you have any kind of initial reactions to this, and the answer may be no, but I think as both of you know, and Harsimar, you and I have been discussing recently, is that some of these more specific kind of privacy adjacent or data adjacent rulemaking has drawn constitutional scrutiny. And my guess is, that these types of restrictions may end up also being litigated in the courts about to what extent does this violate the First Amendment, either by causing, organizations to speak or by limiting how they speak. Interested in your perspective of whether the FTC has tried to anticipate that, or is that something that is still a TBD about how they would survive a constitutional challenge?
Well, Scott, I'm not going to say that I'm a constitutional lawyer, but a couple of, I think, initial reactions are some of the principles behind these rules are longstanding. And so, I think the FTC has thought about some of those constitutional challenges and how they might fit in around restrictions around commercial speech, whether disclosure is narrowly tailored enough to make sure that consumers understand what is actually happening. Now, with all of that said, the judicial environment that we are in is much different than it has been previously. And there's just a lot more scrutiny around steps that the administrative state has taken. And so if there ever was a time to sort of renew some of those challenges, I think now would be it. Just given that it seems that courts are much more amenable to really taking a microscope to say, okay, this may have been fine in the past, but we may have been too deferential then. Now we need to sort of take a look and provide our own independent assessment.
Yeah, really a place to watch, and we'll be having a separate podcast conversation shortly on that exact topic. So for those interested in the constitutionality of privacy laws, and in particular where some litigants have found success in challenging privacy-oriented requirements, stay tuned because we'll have an episode on that in a week or two. So Lance, maybe we turn it back to thinking about these set of rules, now that are, may need to change business practices, at least for some. Interested in your perspective about impact here, and how is it that organizations can first try to understand to what extent they're going to be subject to these rules, and then coming up with a roadmap for compliance.
Yeah, so I think the first step, really, if you are a business that's involved in selling products or services, you should be paying attention, right? This is a broadly applicable rule, and a lot of the categories of information that may be subject to it, as we've kind of discussed throughout today, might not be obvious at first blush, whether it's indicators of social media influence, whether it's a rating that's not necessarily, you might not initially think of as a review. And so, given the potential financial penalty, we think that it behooves anybody to just take a pause and take a look at the rule and make sure that what is going on in your shop when it comes to interacting with the public through reviews. I think that's particularly important because the FTC has had a long trend recently, aggressive enforcement, where the FTC is looking to put teeth behind its rules, to really enforce them. And now with these higher consequences, the FTC being able to seek monetary penalties immediately without necessarily a prior warning, it's important that companies look before the FTC comes calling rather than after.
Yeah, interesting. I guess maybe the next question I have, Harsimar, if you have a view on this, is what does this mean from a record-keeping, policy making, procedure kind of implementing perspective? Because reviews are somewhat organic, right? Especially if it's someone in the public who can make a review at any particular time on really any website for which their businesses have no control or even knowledge. To what extent is it the obligation for the manufacturers of the products or the provider of the services to demonstrate that those were not fake reviews? Or is the onus on the FTC to prove that those were fake reviews or in violation of the suppression rules, or things that trigger the disclosure obligations that Lance was describing? It just seems as though could end up being a huge effort if the obligation is on the manufacturer or the provider to prove that there wasn't a fake review.
Scott, really the focus here is on making sure that when you're working with your marketing team and they're going out and either launching campaigns to generate those sort of organic reviews, or you're working with influencers or other partners to try to generate testimonials, that you're thinking through the steps that the business or the provider, the manufacturer is taking there. You're right that there's nothing stopping me from writing a fake review about Lance's business, right? But what the FTC is focusing on is that Lance isn't going around, paying people or soliciting these fake reviews or things that might be perceived as a fake review because there isn't a disclosure there. And so to this question around what steps should businesses be taking, both from a policy perspective as well as practical pieces, it really is having strategic conversations around, okay, as a business, how are we affirmatively engaging with these reviews? And are we doing that in a way that might cause concerns around these reviews accurately reflecting individuals' experiences? And if so, what steps can we take? I think one of the examples that's given is, let's say someone goes and promotes your business and tells their audience, hey, go follow the Data Chronicles. It's a great podcast, and maybe people who like that other person say, okay, they recommended it, I'll do that. That's not a fake review. That the person sort of made their affirmative choice. But if you went around and said, hey, go like the Data Chronicles podcast, I'll give you $5 if you subscribe, that's the type of place where you're now getting into murkier and dangerous territory, honestly, because that may not reflect the person's actual opinion.
Well, good news on that one, Harsimar, is that the Data Chronicles does not have the budget to be paying for those type of reviews, nor do we have any influencer relationships. But that'll be version 2.0 of the platform. I mean, I guess I'm interested also is thinking about this applicability portion, right? You're mentioning this applies to the business, the one who's selling products and services. And so those would be, the ones that you would think of as more likely the people who are actually selling the product and selling the service or looking to sell them. What implications does this have, if any, on the platforms on which those reviews are being posted? So if you operate a social media platform that is often used by influencers who are driving traffic to that particular site, does the platform have exposure here?
So actually, the FTC received a number of comments on that specific issue. And as a result, throughout the rule, there are carve-outs in multiple sections that make it clear that for most of the sections, there's no liability for a company that is out there and offering, let's say, a marketplace or a platform for reviews. If there happen to be fake reviews on that site, they are usually not going to be subject to the rule. There are, of course, gray areas where what if what is happening is the platform is the one that is going out and incentivizing reviews. I think those are going to be trickier questions than where it is simply a review platform that happens to be hosting reviews of other companies' products.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting. So maybe as we wrap here, maybe I'd end with a final question, and that is, you mentioned, Lance, that one of the implications here, or Harsimar, maybe you had mentioned, the focus is really on those commercial relationships between brands and influencers and those who are providing reviews. And in some ways, right, this is going to continue to drive the necessary conversation between legal and marketing. And kind of your data related compliance teams and those who are responsible for putting out the marketing efforts and the brand promotion efforts, maybe stepping in the shoes of an in-house organization or an in-house lawyer within an organization. How are you approaching this conversation, and who do you think needs to be involved?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that already, let's take a step back. Already, there were existing guidelines, and so you should have already had guidelines for your marketing people. This should be one more step of a process where you are communicating between legal and marketing about how you're engaging with the public. Those existing guidelines didn't go away. And so really now this should be a conversation where you're building on top and you're saying, here is the next step. The next step is there are potentially more severe penalties for conduct that was already unlawful. Those conversations should include the legal team. They should include your compliance team. They should include your marketing team, and they should be recurring. This is going to be a constant conversation where everybody needs to be in the loop, and there should be clear guidance about these rules, about the guidance that was already in place, and making sure that you're checking in when there's new campaigns, and that people, when they're brought on board, are aware of what your expectations are.
And Harsimar, I'm interested in your perspective on that question, including that these rules obviously apply going forward, but they apply just as much to legacy relationships that may be in place as they do new relationships that are formed after the fact.
Yeah, Scott, as Lance was mentioning, there is a lot of overlap here with some of the existing guidelines. And if anything, the rules help us get a better sense of, here's how the FTC is thinking about these things. They haven't just started thinking about them today. They've been thinking about them for a long time. And so you really need to be looking at this sort of comprehensively to make sure that it's not just the new campaigns that are being started, but the existing relationships that are there and the existing practices in place.
Yeah, interesting. Well, really appreciate your time, Harsimar and Lance. This was really informative. And so thank you for sharing your areas of expertise.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for having us.
With that, I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and those were your data points.